Hey guys, Gary with the Northwest Jeepcast here. Hey, today we're installing Evo's Rock Stop bump stop kit. We're actually going to be putting on coilovers here too, so we're going to try to kill two birds with one stone. It includes King's bumps. Now these are reclaimed, previously used, but you know they're rebuildable. They're still good forever. Took these off my Jeep, and now we're going to be installing a kit on Sean's Jeep right here. It also comes with a bracket that helps you French in these bump stops into the frame, so they're going to sit about halfway into the frame. In addition to that, it comes with a tube that your bump stop slides into. All this gets welded together like that and French into the frame, and there's a few things that we got to do just to make sure that everything all lines up. To start with, we took everything apart already, so we got shocks out of the way, we got the sway bar out of the way. Brake is still here. We're going to get that out of the way because obviously we've got to cut this out here. So that's going to be the first step, is just start to getting this out of the way after we've already gotten everything out. One good thing to remember is when you're going to drop your axle, loosen up the bolts to your control arms. That way they don't bind as you're dropping it. You're going to get more flex out of it. Remove things, you know, this is the ABS sensor here. It's got some of these Christmas tree plugs to hold it into place. So remove some of those. It'll give you an extra inch. Obviously you're removing your emergency brake line out of its bracket, out of its holder. So you just twist it out of there, it comes right out, and that really helps you get the axle a lot lower, giving us room to start working on this. So we're going to start grinding. Alright, so now we've gotten the brakes out of the way, so that way the line isn't going to interfere. We're going to try using the plasma cutter first, and it's got a gouging bit on it. So it doesn't go all the way through the metal, it just starts erasing metal. It's like an eraser, it's kind of cool. So I'm going to see if I can get rid of a lot of the weld that way. Alright, well molten metal is just flying all over the place, so I got on some sleeves. Hopefully that'll keep me from getting burned.
Now moving over to the installation of the Evo rear bolt-on coilovers, there are three major steps: the upper coilover brackets, the Rockstar lower brackets, and the rear sway bar relocation.
Alright, so even though this is a bolt-on kit, we did add some welds in some places to just beef that up. Additionally, we found that the bracket sits higher than the plate itself, so we reinforced that with a couple of washers. 3 exactly, and then put a nut on the top as well, and then we came back in here and pushed the coilover in and tightened those up. Those are not 2 9/16, a 9/16 bolt, 9/16 nut. Alright, so for installing the Rock Stars, you measure 1.5 inches down from the control arm bolt. And these Rock Stars let you raise the shock mounting location. After we cut the bottom of the shock mount off, then we're going to be able to slap the Evo Rock Stars on. It's going to go right in on here. This one happens to be the driver's side, and I'm holding it up along the passenger side, so that's not the right one. But you get the idea, and the cool thing about this, it's like super huge and beefy, but it gives you a very nice flat bottom, so that way instead of having a lower shock mount that is all edge and catching rocks, this is nice and smooth, slides right over the rocks. And look how beefy this is. Super reinforced, very strong. Evo did a great job with the Rock Stars. Alright, so here we have a lower shock bracket that has been cut. We're cleaning it up so that we can put the Evo Rock Star on it. On the driver's side over here, we have the track bar bracket. It's a big reinforced bracket, and it comes down to that lower control arm mount as well. Well, that's going to be in the way, so we got to figure out something to do with that. And over on the passenger side, we got the Rockstar getting banged into place. It's of course a tight fit, but Sean, how close are we?
Pretty close. Almost have the holes aligned. So we'll take it back off and paint it and see what we can do to get it on.
Alright, so it takes a little finessing to get the Rockstars into alignment. We had to grind a little bit of the front lower part of the lower control arm bracket, so that way we had room to get the Rockstar manipulated into place. And on top of that, this side, our driver's side on this vehicle, because it had that extra thick bracket for the truck bar, we had to find another bolt, so we put a longer bolt in here, so it's a little bit longer than it should be, but it'll work. The other thing that we had to do, because the Rockstars are skidded along the bottom, we had to bring the lower control arm forward in its frame bracket. So you see there's a bunch of room in here, so we disconnected this, slid it forward, and then had to manipulate the axle quite a bit in order to clear the bottom of the Rockstar. And on the back side of the bracket, we were only able to get the upper bolt to connect. The lower bolt hole didn't quite align with our bracket. It's just off by just a little. The way the tension on here works anyway is all of the stress is going to be at the top of this bracket, because the shock, the coilover in this case, when it mounts to the lower shock mount, all of that weight of the vehicle will be coming down right onto here. So it's going to want to make this edge go away from the vehicle. And in doing so, what we decided to do is actually put an inch here and an inch here of a weld in order to beef that up. We put in this long bolt through the bottom of the shock. It is 3/4 inch socket, 3/4 inch wrench. And the way we did it here is put 2 washers on the inside, then the sleeve, and then 2 washers again. So 4 washers and 2 spacers in total inside, to keep it all nice and tight, so that when we tighten it up, it doesn't squeeze and move very much. Alright, so on these bump stops, we align the bracket onto the frame. Evo chose to put the E on the back side. The brackets are symmetrical, so you could choose either way. And they do that because if you had their lever in the rear, a bracket goes right here, so some of this gets cut off. But as we jack this up now, we're going to want to make sure that we have a really good placement front to back on the bracket as we make our lines. And then we also want to measure height. The Evo instructions call for the bump can being welded in its highest position. We don't have that here. We have it in about its lowest position in order to bump this out. And that's probably telling us that what we're going to do is bring it up to about here and add another bump stop puck onto the stack that's here. That way we can kind of get this even down. So we're going to get that bump stop puck in here. This placement has it as far back as it can go, and that's where your center spot is. So that's a good starting spot. Start with it all the way back and then see if you need to work forward from there. Alright, so we've added another bump stop here. That's going to help us make sure that we have the right height. We're also now doing an articulation test where we only jack up this side. Again, just to make sure that both when you push up the entire axle together and when you articulate just one side, that we still end up well centered, just so that before we start cutting or burning anything, you know exactly where we're going to end up. And now that we have that pad there, we come just maybe a tad bit more. Yeah, right there. Alright, so now we're in exactly the right spot. Evo's directions call for putting the can in at its highest spot possible, and that's exactly where we're at right now that we added another bump stop. So it's looking good, ready to cut and burn. Alright, set up my guide on the other side now. Putting a guide makes it easy. It helps you cut a nice straight line. If you can clamp something in that lets you rest your plasma cutter on, then you can torch it going straight down and keep a straight line.
Alright, so to measure the height of your can and where the bump stop should bottom out, again I've released the gas in the bump stop so that way it can be totally pushed in. We've brought the suspension all the way up, and I left about, I don't know, 3/16 of an inch here at the bottom, maybe a 1/4 inch, to go on the coilover, so that way I know exactly where to place this. And with the extra bump stop pad that we've added on the bottom here, that lets this can get exactly, almost aligned. It's probably about 1/16 of an inch base on the bottom to drop down, and so then I marked it here with a pink pen. Just any reference that you need, just to know exactly what height it should be at. Because of course, when you start welding stuff in, you want this axle back out of the way. The other thing that we're going to do is to make room for the nut and easy access to fill this with gas. We're going to trim a little bit of the inner fender out of the way. So I'm just going to kind of make a little mark here to let me go up and over. The passenger side is a lot easier. There's nothing behind the passenger side, but on the driver's side we have the fuel filler hose right behind it. So it's going to be a little bit challenging to get that, but we're going to figure out a way. So I talked about cleaning out a little bit of the inner fender, so I have my line here, and I got this cool tool. It's just a nibbler, connects to a drill bit. It gets this little cutter thing that goes in and out. Makes jobs like these pretty easy, so check it out. We tacked in the can to the bracket, and I did that for a couple of reasons. One, so that I could put it all together and prime the backside, so that way we got that all primed up and we weld it in, really give it some protection, whatever doesn't melt. But then also, when you're welding these cans, you got to do it very carefully. As it cools, it wants to become oblong, and so I thought if I tack it to this first and then have it all together, then two things will help me with these together. One is, as the tube itself cools, maybe it won't move as much, deform, become oblong, and even more importantly, the bracket itself will stay in place, right? So if I just had the bracket alone and then I started welding it, it's gonna cool, and if you tack it carefully and put it in place where it's less likely to move, you might not have an issue. But it could move to where it either opens up more or gets smaller as it cools. And here I thought if I have my can inside of it, then the bracket isn't going to move at all. So I liked that idea, and so therefore I'm going to go for it. Got this in here, tap it in place. I know the bracket is absolutely in place because the can only fit right here. Like, the can is forcing the bracket to not be cockeyed anyway, to not be off one side or the other. The fact that the can fits in the hole that I grinded out, cut out, plasma cut out, means that it has to be there, and the bracket has to be in the right place. Alright, so you also get these brackets that help relocate your sway bar. It pushes it back about an inch so that way the sway bar itself doesn't touch the coilovers. So it just gives you a little bit more clearance. Alright, so on this rear coilover set, even though it was a takeoff system, so we had these brackets that came off another vehicle, we welded them in place. There were places where you had to bolt it in, but there was also some additional strength that we wanted to add by welding it in as well. So those brackets, these upper ones up here, got welded in. Some of the tricky things that we had to do here is the way this bracket aligned with the stock shock location is that we needed to put like 3 thick washers in there for spacers and tighten that down as well. So there's a bolt going up through. In this setup, there was a nut welded onto the top of the shock bucket, which I think is pretty unique. So we had to kind of account for that nut being there as part of the build for this Jeep by building around it with some washers that created spacers that we could then bolt down the bracket on top. And then we just added some strength by welding it in at least 3 points of contact, right? So there's a couple of bolts up front, there's a bolt here in the middle, and then we got a weld in the rear. At the same time, you want to make sure that you get longer brake lines and longer end links. This system is going to give you more flex, more suspension travel than what you're probably used to, what you probably have right now, and making sure that your sway bar doesn't taco on you, meaning like overextend and snap the other way. That would be really bad in the rear because then it's going to come in contact with your brakes, and while it's likely that the sway bar end link will bend first, you don't want to take a chance in having it break your brakes. At the same time over here, we also did the Frenched-in Evo bump stop kit back here. With this kit, you cut off the old bump stop mount entirely. You cut a slot into the frame and round it out so that way this tube can get all the way in. This tube has a lot of trickiness to it in that as you weld, you got to take your time and probably do like an inch weld at a time and let it cool. Excessive heat and then excessive cool down process is going to warp this tube. Evo's instructions say some sanding might be needed on the inside. If you get this too hot, you're going to be doing a lot more than sanding, like deep grinding. One thing that we found that seemed to work out pretty good is to get an exhaust spreader. An exhaust spreader that starts at lower than 2 inches and that'll go a little bit above 2 inches. So as you put it, you can put that exhaust spreader inside and tighten it, and that exhaust spreader will then help hold the shape of the tube. So as you heat it up, at that point you might just need some light sanding or minimal grinding. So, but if you don't try to hold this shape first, you're going to have a lot of grinding to do. When you get the bump stop in, these are the King bump stops, 2 inches of travel, and you tighten it up and then you charge it to 60 psi. So that'll then give you enough pressure in there to then hold your bump. You want to make sure that at ride height you've got about 2 to 3 inches of space between your bottom of the bump and the bump pads themselves with this setup. That's how it works with this setup. Different setups are going to be different. If you're running smaller tires, maybe you don't need that much space because you can allow for more up travel. But with this rig running 37s with highline fenders, this is the amount of bump you want right here. Like I said, it's a solid 3 inches. And yeah, so I think that wraps up all of it. The coilovers get charged to 150. In this setup, we're running 200s over 250s in the rear, and that's getting us 5.5 inches of lift over stock height. That's what Evo calls their HD springs. So their base springs, I think, are the same spring weights, but a 10-inch on top and a 12-inch on bottom. So a 10-inch 200 and a 12-inch 250. And that's going to get you about 3.5 to 4, I would say, because obviously it's a 2-inch shorter spring on top. But with this setup right now, we're running at 5.5 inches, so it's a pretty good amount. I think that was maybe a little bit more than what Sean was bargaining for, But hey, the best way to not get hit is to not be there. So when you're wheeling on the trail, get your body up, get it out of the way, and then you don't bang on rocks as much. So that wraps this up. Hey, thanks for joining us, guys, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Put your comments in there. Any questions that you got, comment right there on the video. Don't forget you can send us an email too. We're at nwjeepcast@gmail.com. And don't forget to follow us on our podcast, found everywhere podcasts are found, the Northwest Jeepcast. All right, thanks.